Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Scott Cuthbert, CEO of Safepedia, and excited to have Conn, Maciel, Carey with us again for another OSHA Quick Take. Today, we're going to be talking about OSHA's egregious enforcement and severe violation enforcement program and the updates that are coming to those programs. And want to remind everybody that this is just the quick take, that Conn, Maciel, Carey will be holding a longer form webinar on April 13th, where they'll spend more time diving into all the details. So this is a quick intro, kind of determine whether you want to register for that one. And we will have those links below so that you can just click over and sign up for that webinar on April 13th. So again, thanks, Eric, for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you to kick things off.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. We're having a great time visiting with you every month and talking about some pressing new OSHA issue. And it's starting to sound like we're the boy who cried wolf with all of these aggressive new concerning enforcement initiatives by OSHA, but I'm telling you, we're not the boy who cried wolf. We're just living in a village full of wolves. It seems like right now with OSHA, it really does look like this is an agency that was handcuffed and forced to focus on the pandemic, and not begrudgingly. It was the critical workplace health issue of the day, but it constrained them from addressing some really important priorities, probably that the Biden administration had for OSHA. Absent the pandemic. And now finally, and I know it's not totally the case that we can say the pandemic is in the rearview mirror, but at OSHA and outside of the healthcare space, it kind of is. And so the agency is, finally able to let loose and go after those things, those priorities, those hazards, those tools in the tool belt that they were somewhat restrained from introducing because all eyes, all hands on deck, focused on COVID-19, and the two things that my colleagues Aaron Gelb and Darius Rahani Shukla are planning to cover in our April 13th webinar are maybe the tip of the spear for this new enforcement focused agency coming out of the pandemic that I think are real game changers for OSHA enforcement. And I think OSHA thinks that they're real game changers for OSHA enforcement as well. That is a reconfiguration, retooling of its dreaded severe violator enforcement program and rewriting a decades old, what's colloquially referred to as the egregious enforcement policy, but really it's about citing violations on an instance by instance, or we used to always refer to it as per instance basis. So we're going to talk a little bit today about those two new policy changes, and then get into a lot of detail about those two new policies, or what we call these two new enforcement tools in our program on the 13th. And I'm going to talk a little bit about SVEP, or the Severe Violator Enforcement Program right now. And I think Darius is going to talk about the new instance by instance citation policy. And if anybody has sort of followed our blog, the OSHA Defense Report blog, or seen me speak on OSHA enforcement issues, or participate in our webinar series, I'm sure that you've heard me talk and seen me write about the Severe Violator Enforcement Program. This is, I'm borderline obsessed with this program. I think it is bad policy. It has been bad policy by OSHA, at least in implementation. The way that it has been implemented has been problematic since it was introduced in 2010. And I've got bad news. The changes that were just announced at the end of 2022 don't make it better. I think they make it materially worse for many of the same reasons that I have been criticizing the program for years. So let me tell you just briefly what is the Severe Violator Enforcement Program, and we'll talk about the changes that are coming. It is a program that allows OSHA to focus its enforcement resources on employers that OSHA believes have demonstrated indifference to their OSHA Act obligations. The idea being that they focus their enforcement resources on bad actors. And that, in principle, is a good thing, right? An agency that is using data and using and targeting its resources on those employers that are not responding to enforcement or not, voluntarily complying and not responding effectively to enforcement is a good, smart program. The problem is in the criteria that OSHA has used to designate somebody as an employer who is demonstrating indifference to their OSHA Act obligations, the criteria that they're using to qualify employers into the program, and also the timing for when employers are dumped into the severe violator enforcement program and how they get out, have all been problematic since this program was introduced in 2010. It's about to get worse. The main criteria that has, and there's 4 categories of violations that qualify an employer into SVEP. The principal one that has plagued employers over the now 12, 13 years of that SVEP has been around is this category that says that you qualify in if you receive 2 or more willful, repeat, or failure to abate citations related to certain high emphasis hazards. And there was about 9 categories of hazards, 9 categories of OSHA standards that if you got willful or repeat violations in those categories, you were dumped into this program. The big change that OSHA has just announced is to eliminate the high emphasis hazard limitation. It's no longer just those 9 categories. Now, an employer who has been cited for 2 or more willful, repeat, or failure to abate violations regarding any hazard, any standard, will qualify into the severe violator enforcement program. Looking at historical data, enforcement actions that historically would not have qualified into SVEP, based on this new criteria, OSHA anticipates at least tripling the number of employers who are plagued now or branded as bad actors. So this is a program that hopefully none of you have had to be concerned about. It hasn't been on your radar. Now all of a sudden it may be. And a lot of you may be thinking, well, this is for willful violators. That's not us. It would be inconceivable that OSHA would characterize us as a willful violator of any OSHA standard. The reality is that it has not been willful violations. It has been repeat violations that is responsible for almost all of the cases. Almost all of the employers who have qualified in are getting in with repeat violations. And, a repeat means it's happened more than once, but it's not necessarily a sign of a bad actor, especially if you are a large national employer or a large regional employer with numerous individual workplaces. Looking back 5 years across your entire network of operations, to have the same standards cited more than once now will make you a bad actor with all that comes with that. And we're going to get into in detail on the 13th how you qualify in, who has been qualifying in, and who's likely to get tripped up by this in the future. We're going to talk about what it means for a violation to be a high gravity violation, how that's defined by OSHA, and the consequences of qualifying in. And believe me, this is not a program you want anything to do with. So it's going to be a fun discussion about a very unfun topic on the 13th. Yeah. But that'll be my piece of that. And I'll hand it either back to you, Scott, or to Darius.
Yeah.
The rest of this.
I was just going to jump in quick, and it sounds like you'll get into it on the 13th, and you kind of, I think, answered a few of the questions that I had. But I thought I heard you say that it's repeat, but it has to be the same violation. Was that correct?
So, I mean, it has to be characterized as a repeat violation by OSHA, and OSHA characterizes violations as repeat when they involve the same standard and substantially similar conditions. That's the law requires that it be a substantially similar violation to be characterized as repeat. Ordinarily, that means the same standard, not always, but almost always the same cited standard, and it really should be in substantially similar conditions. Right. OSHA will very often sort of end the analysis at same employer, same standard, within 5 years, here's your repeat violation. You can push back against that. One of the other things that we will talk about on the 13th is strategy for how to avoid this dreaded program. And the main strategy, it will almost sound like the strategies we're describing are how to avoid repeat violations or how to address repeat violations when you receive them. because that really is the way to avoid SVEP, is to avoid repeat violations. And we'll get into that in some detail, but that's the concept.
Yeah, great. I've got lots of questions. That means I have to show up on April 13th and
Keep them coming, but we love
a
it.
full explanation. Yeah, absolutely. So, Darius, you're gonna talk about the incident by incident side of standard. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So when we initially announced this webinar series, we suggested that the word around the Beltway was that OSHA would be revising its egregious enforcement policy, which it had previously used to generate multi-million-dollar enforcement actions. From 1990 to early this year, the egregious enforcement policy allowed OSHA to cite employees on a per instance basis when the violation was found to be both willful and also meet an additional criteria demonstrating how serious it was. The point of the egregious enforcement policy was that it was a kind of a penalty multiplier. It now enabled OSHA to transfer from initially setting an employee with a single penalty to, for the same violation, including multiple penalty violations. Now, starting in January 2023 to present, that policy has changed. Instead of the willful plus standard, that's OSHA can cite employees with that penalty multiplier when the citations are found to be high gravity. High gravity previously was a descriptor / determination that was really just used for penalty calculations, but was mostly irrelevant. Now it matters severely. So during our webinar on April 13th, we'll try and explain first what exactly is a high gravity OSHA citation, and importantly, the strategies of avoiding being cited for those high gravity citations so you can avoid that penalty multiplier.
Yeah, and I would add just real briefly, Scott, that the concept of really focusing on gravity as opposed to the characterization, right? We think about characterization of OSHA citations as willful, repeat, serious, and other than serious. And the gravity was just this thing hanging around in the background that nobody cared about. You heard me mention it in the severe violator context. That's a new important criteria that'll get you swept in, regardless of what standard, what hazard it is. It's also now become critical in this instance by instance, because if you have a high gravity violation, even if it's serious, even in some instances, if it's other than serious, OSHA can implicate this new instance by instance policy. So instead of just willful violations, willful egregious violations that could get individualized penalties, they can do it now for serious and some other than serious if it meets that high gravity character. So this was a rarely used tool when it was just willful and some aggravating criteria. Lower that down now to serious and other than serious violations, and all of a sudden you're going to start to see what used to be a $35,000 penalty would be a $350,000 penalty if you've got 10 employees or 10 machines that weren't guarded or locked out, or people making entries into a confined space over 4 different days, 4 different entries, 4 different permits. You're going to start to see OSHA look for those opportunities to, ratchet up with this penalty multiplier in situations that would never have been even possible before, because it had to be willful plus. Now it could be anything.
Yeah, no, that's obviously important for employers to realize, and like you say, dig into the strategy on how to avoid that going forward. I know you'll probably dig into it on the 13th, but could you speak to just like how often you see these severe violation enforcements turn into criminal charges, or is that fairly rare occurrence?
I would say that in every situation where there is a criminal prosecution under the OSHA Act, it is a severe violator enforcement case. Not every severe violator enforcement program case is prosecuted criminally, but one of the factors I've been focusing on, the big change this year, was to eliminate that high emphasis hazard. That's one of the 4 categories that qualify you in. One of the categories that used to qualify you in and still will qualify you in is a willful repeat or failure to abate violation related to a fatality, or not just related, but really as the cause of the fatality. That happens to be for a willful violation that causes a fatality. the threshold for criminal prosecution under the OSHA Act. So in order to get there, in order to bring that criminal charge under the OSHA Act, it de facto meets one of the qualifying criteria for SVEB, but only one of them. So you may have somebody who's a severe violator because they got 2 repeat violations related to there no incident at all, right? OSHA was just on site because of an employee complaint and found obstructed exit routes and unsafe stacks in the back of a retail store. Now you've got 2 repeat violations. If they're characterized as high gravity, you're a severe violator, but that can't be charged criminally. But if you have an employee who is caught up in the moving parts of a machine and is killed, and you get a willful violation of lockout, tagout, or machine guarding, that's a severe violator case, and it also has the potential to be charged criminally under the OSHA Act.
Right. So definitely lots to unpack on the 13th, and definitely sounds complex and intricate. So definitely recommend everybody click the link below and join Eric and Darius on April 13th to dig into the details of the severe violator enforcement program and the updates to it, obviously from OSHA. And again, like always, we'll encourage people to reach out, connect with you guys on LinkedIn. We'll have a link to your website with email and phone number contact as well. If anybody's any contact instructions, if somebody's in the middle of something like this, or they're on kind of high alert, should they is there a BAT number they can phone to get a hold of you guys right away?
Yeah, so certainly we all have go bags packed in our offices. As OSHA attorneys, you've got to be ready and reach out by email, cell phone, work number, whatever. You'll get our team. We've got a deep bench of OSHA specialists who is what we do all around the country, focus on helping employers navigate tricky situations with OSHA. And so, yeah, reach out to any of us on the OSHA team at CMC, and you'll be in good hands.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. And again, we'll have the link for the full webinar that you're hosting on April 13th.
See everybody then. Thank you.